Okay, for a minute. Hello, everyone. Sorry. Okay, so for this afternoon, we will continue with the discussion on tingnan na ni economic growth and development. My goodness, Nana din na. So yesterday, we had was it yesterday? Yes, yesterday we had the game. Kahapon ba to? Lost ko. Yes, yesterday. Ay, sorry. So yesterday we had the Family Feud game wherein we based the answers and we reviewed the salient points of the video about the economic reform of Korea, starting from the moment that um, it was free after the Korean War. And then we learned about the progress and how it was able to achieve its state or progress that we have right now as a country. And we will be having a comparative analysis with Korea and the Philippines and how they were able to achieve economic development. But before that, before we proceed to that part, we will define terms and we will define some concepts first on when do we know that we are experiencing economic growth and when are we experiencing economic development. So let's define the two terms and differentiate them. So we have here economic growth and economic development. Sorry. So economic growth is actually the increase in a country's output of goods and services. So let's try to pause in that part. So what do you mean by increase in the country's output of goods and services? What are the basis for this one? When do we know that there is an increase in a country's output or production of goods and services? What are we trying to look at based on our discussion on the measurement of national output? Unsa tong ginatanaw if there is an increase in the production of goods and services? What do you think? You can still remember. What are we trying to look at? What is the measure that we are referring to if we
GDP.
want to know if there is an increase? Okay, it's GDP as well as GNI. So this is more on the country's output and the citizens' output. And we would know if we are experiencing economic growth through these two measures. So muna atong ginatanaw. So the increase in the output of goods and services can be caused by an increase in the quantity, meaning midaghan, and the quality of the factors of production. So meaning there will only be expansion, there will only be increase in the production if there is an improvement with the quantity and quality of factors of production. Otherwise, walay mahitabo nga increase in the production. So mo na siya. That's the reason why there is an increase in the GDP and GNI. On the other hand, we would know if there is an economic development because economic development is defined as the sustained economic growth over long periods. What do you mean by that? We know that economic growth is an increase in the output, right? In the number of output. So kung mutaas yung GDP and mutaas ang GNI, it means for a short period of time, it means we are experiencing economic growth. But if that economic growth will be sustained for a long period of time, then that means we might have achieved economic development. Might, because it's not the sole factor or it's not the sole basis for us to know if a country is having economic development. There are other factors or other indicators that we have to look at aside from the increase in the output of goods and services for a long period of time. So, when we say there is economic development, aside from the sustained economic growth, it is also concerned with both the economic and social well-being of people of a specific area. Now, what do you mean by that? For example, let's try to look at the Philippines. Diba, for the past years, before the pandemic hit, our country has been experiencing economic growth for almost 20 years. For almost around 15 years, let's say. Mga 15 years. Sure, isn't that too long for just an economic growth? dili ba na siya ma-consider na economic development? What do you think? Can you consider that one economic development already? Like around 15 to 20 years, nag-increase ang GDP o GNI consistently. Pwede na ba na siya ma-consider yung economic development? Pwede, pero I mean, dili gid siya economic development to be exact. Nga naman, again, there is another indicator. Aside from a sustained economic growth, there is another indicator that we have considered. And what is that indicator? We have HDI. We have the Human Development Index. Nakalimot ko unsay ano adto na may topic about human resources, grade 7. Can you still remember? Or wala mo nag-cover, ana? Were you able to cover human resources? Or before na siya sa women ninyo nga topic. Di ba na may topic about women? Asian studies? Sinibukan ni Zar. So, wala mo naka-remember sa human resources? Wala? Okay. Sige. Anyway, so kana siya nga part sa Human Development Index. That is one indicator of economic development aside from economic growth. So I would just reiterate some points. Again, we would know if our country is experiencing economic growth through the two measures. Sakto lagi. The GDP and the GNI. If we try to look at that, if mag-increase na sila duha, then that means for a short period of time, then that means there is economic growth. But if we want to look at the economic development, it should be economic growth plus the HDI. You get my point? Again, tanaw na to if na-achieve ba ang economic growth, at the same time, okay ba ang HDI if we want to look at the economic development. Now, what are we looking at if we refer to HDI or Human Development Index? Human Development Index is actually a tool that measures development. So meaning we would know if we are experiencing economic development through the HDI. So unsa may nasa HDI, it is actually a ratio, a measurement of 0 to 1. 0 being the lowest and 1 being the highest. Meaning if your country has an HDI of 0.3, then that means gamay kayo mong HDI and at the same time, dili gyud mo develop nga country. Wala gyud na achieve ang economic development. But let's say that you achieve 1, pero so far wala may 1 nga country. Wala naka-perfect 1. So no country is perfect at present. But there is a country almost near to 1, around 0.96 ana siguro nga rate. So walay mo lapas og 1 ha. 1 is already the highest ratio when it comes to Human Development Index. Now, what are we looking at if we talk about HDI? Now, HDI measures different dimensions. Tulo ang ginatanaw sa HDI. So again ha, I will repeat, we would one indicator of economic development is HDI. And for us to know if okay ang HDI, na itulo nato ang ginatanaw na measures or dimension, we have health, education, and standard of living. So unsa man naa ang tulo? So those are the basis or for us to know if okay ang well-being sa mga people, because basically that is what we are looking at if okay gid ang economy, the life of the people. So let's go over with the different measures, dimension. So let's start first with health. So we have here health. So again, HDI has 3 dimensions that we measure: health, education, and standard of living. Now, what about health? Unsay gina-measure dinhi sa health? It is measured according to the life expectancy of the people in that country. Unsa man life expectancy? Sure. Life expectancy is actually the age on the average sa life sa mga tao. The expected number of years that the people are living in that country or ang life, ang age. The higher the age, it means na may pasabot ana. If high ang on the average ang edad sa mga tao, what does that mean? Kung on the average kitaas og edad, sure dugay sila mamatay. Unsa may naa? What do you think? On the average, if taas, let's say for example, on the average kay around 80 years old ang life expectancy. What do you think is the meaning of that? Any guess? Any idea? Rupert,
Sure, tsada ilang healthcare and uh,
yes. Yes, that's one thing. Sada ilaang healthcare. Napakaingon lang ga. Sorry for interrupting.
that's nakakauban.
Yes. Number one is, basic, ang pinaka-simple, healthy sila. Ano lang, di ba? And aside from that is, okay ilang healthcare system. Di ba? A good government, a fully developed or a developed country would be considered as developed if okay ang healthcare system and healthy ang mga tao. Of course, that is accompanied with better system sa hospitals, and at the same time, okay ilang access sa ilang healthcare, dili pareha sa ato ang galisod na dayon pag-abot sa hospital kay gapiot, di pa gid baka afford bisan og public na, di ba? May uban nga inana. But for other countries, if you have good healthcare system and if on the average the life expectancy or the age of the people are high on the average, it means healthy ang mga tao. Nga naman, di ba if you notice in a country nga daghan pobre, healthy ba ang mga tao? Oo or dili? Healthy ba ang mga tao on the average if daghan pobre? Di ba dili? Commonly, if many are poor, those poor people are actually unhealthy. Basically because they experience starvation. Others can't afford to buy healthy products or healthy food. Diba? Ang uban, mo inom pagani og sa pa, diba? Sa river. That is the case of Africa. Since they don't have clean water, then wala sila choice but to drink directly from the river, which is really not clean. Diba? Dili man gid siya filtered. Pero do they have a choice? No. Basically, they are poor and asa man na nag-reflect sa ilang country which is also poor. So inana ang gakahitabo. So if there is a high poverty incidence in that country, basically dili healthy ang mga tao. They don't have access to easy access to the healthcare system and dili pud okay ang healthcare system basically. So if you try to compare a country with a good healthcare system or with a high life expectancy, kay let's say for example nakoy friend nag-adto siya og Germany kay gi-visit ay kay Morgan na siya friend dito something a friend of mine went to Germany to visit her friend as well nga pregnant. You know what? The thing about there in Germany was that the moment daw that you are sent to the hospital, everything is for free. Literally, if mga anak ka rito, for free gid siya. Imo labor, imo ang doctor's fee, and even the moment that the baby is already out, libre ang diaper, libre ang gatas. O, di ba? Oh my God. Sir, di ba? Pati gani pagkuan, pati gani ang doctor's fee, dili gani libre. I mean, ang diaper, dili gani libre, ang gatas. Tanan na lang gani, dili gid libre, except if naka sa public hospital. You still have to pay a certain amount, pero the thing there is, nakagabayaran. But for highly developed countries, those who have good healthcare system, okay kaayo ang ang inana nga system silang healthcare. They don't have any problem. And at the same time, because of that, the after effect is of course healthy people. At the same time, since gamay raman pud ang poverty incidence, healthy pud ang mga people. So taas siya og life expectancy. Mo nang on the average taas sila og age when it comes to life expectancy. Do you get my point? So mo na siyang isa nga gina-measure the health. The second one is education. Of course, education is the one of the factors why a country is prosperous or why is a country successful. Now, when it comes to education, how is HDI measured here? It is measured in terms of the mean years of schooling. So on the average, pila man ka years nga gaskwela ang mga tao din na. Now, you would know if the country has a high mean years of schooling if people are degree holders, ako sa college, many of the citizens of that country are able to proceed to master's degree, to doctorate degree, and even ang uban, eskwela-eskwela lang, di ba? Multiple courses, nag-second course, nag-third course. In contrast, here in the Philippines, atong education, the mean years of schooling naman ay expected og na ay like in reality something inana. So the mean years of schooling here in the Philippines dili kay kusyurhan 9 man siguro if I'm not mistaken. Nganong 9 raman? Kay it's because siguro na uban sa ato have access to mga degree holders na finished college, na uban na master's degree, na uban na PhD, but most of the Filipinos kay wala gid na human og eskwela. According to statistics, I can't remember exactly what year. Out of 10 children daw, out of 10 children nga makasulod sa elementary, sa grade school, only 8 can finish grade school or elementary. Dayon, 8 lang makaproceed sa high school. Out of those who proceeded to high school, only 5 ang nakasulod sa college. And then out of those 5 people who entered college, only 3 ang makagraduate. O, diba? So, imagine na siya nga statistics out of every 10 children in our country, only 3 or 2 to 3 people, 2 to 3 students lang ang makahuman og eskwela. Ang uban gani, no read, no write. So for other countries, they have access to education, they have scholarships, subsidies, although we also have here in the Philippines, but the problem is we have specific qualifications. In other countries, what they do sa ilang education is that study now, pay later. Naman tayo na, actually, na study now, pay later. DOST does that one, study now, pay later, pero na ay grade requirement. Na kay maintaining grade. But for other countries, as long as you pass all the subjects, and at the same time, as long as you finish, you have at least 6 months na grace period to find a job. And then once you land a job, then you have to start paying off your student loans. Inana ilang system dito. Aside from scholarships, aside from, na din sila yung student loans. Kita, wala man tayo inana. Dili man kayo inana ato ang inana ka established good ang education system sa atua. Although natin mga scholarships, and at the same time, although we have public schools, but the problem here is that we are after manggod. I don't know, this was a concern raised sa education sector. Now that they public schools, but they don't produce the same level of quality when it comes to education than private schools. So mo na nga, instead of students opting to, go to public because mas makatipid, wala sila choice but to find ways and means na masend nilang anak sa private schools because of not to bring down our public schools, but I have tried getting into a public school man. Ato nga time okay man, pero there are other teachers na what do you call this? There are other teachers who really are not into teaching. Kanang dili bitaw para gid sa Corpus. Like I can really attest to that na when I started teaching here in Corpus Christi, there is a certain standard that we have to follow, may requirements, and when it comes to teaching, strategies, na nabitaw, and trainings, and everything. So we have to adhere to that. But with they are more into paperwork. I don't know if you have noticed. By the way, napa mo dira? I hope I am making sense here and you're still listening. So that is for education. And lastly is the standard of living. This is one of the dimensions of HDI, where in standard of living, this is actually the income per person. So this is measured through GNI. GNI per capita. Per capita literally means per head. Again, per capita means per head. So GNI per capita is derived from dividing GNI by the country's total population. That's why I told you when we discussed the measurement of national output, why is it that number 5 si India in terms of GDP and GNI, but they are still poor, diba? That is a very good example of having economic growth, pero dili okay og economic development. Okay sila in terms of the production. Basically, dako makailang country, dako kailang population, so okay po ilang ang production. But it cannot compensate with the total number of people in that area. Gamay ila ang per capita. So that is on the average, the total income of a person annually. So mo nang gina-measure sa GNI per capita. Unsa kadako ang sweldo sa isa ka tao on the average every year. That is GNI per capita. And that would be the basis of the standard of living. The higher the income per year per person of that country, the higher the standard of living. Of course, basically, dako man gyud og sweldo every year. So, we would know if a country is really developed and it's a country worth living if it has high HDI. Now, please don't search. Question. What do you think? Mag-search. What do you think is the best country to live in as of the moment? What do you think? Walay mag-search ha? UK? Philippines? What do you think? Canada? Okay. What else? Australia daw. Mo ba na imong Nor? Australia, ang ginaingon? What do you think? Aside from those mentioned, UK, Canada, Japan. What else? Any other country that you think has a very high age? Finland? Ngayon ba siguro, Australia, di ba? The very common ones, Canada, Australia, New Zealand. Kaya dira man usually ga-migrate ang mga tao. US. But you know what? In terms of HDI, overall na siya ha. Muna makaingon ta nga, sila ang pinakataas of ranking because they are measured in terms of their health, the education, and the standard of living. Gi-search na ni Miles. So the number one country, the best country to live in is actually Norway. 'Di ba? Norway is just way ahead of us in terms of GDP. Pero if i-divide sad siya with the total population, ada ko kay sila GNI. Nana ka imagine that is 66. They have a GNI per capita ha per head. On the average, they have $66.494. Let's try to divide that 145 para hangyo. That is about 2 million annually ila ang income per person. 'Di ba? Dili sa Philippines, pila na siguro annually mga 300,000, 200,000 on the average probably. So mo na nga the best country in terms of HDI to live in is actually Norway. So we have Ireland, Switzerland, Hong Kong, Iceland, Germany. That is 2019 ha. There's no data yet. There's no legit ranking pa in 2020 and 2021 for HDI based on legit sources. So wala pa ni gawas. So this was according to the Human Development Report Office in 2020. So the data is for 2019 pagyapon. So we have Germany, Sweden, Australia, Netherlands. Imagine they have a life expectancy of 80 and above. And then ilang expected and the mean years of schooling is actually 12 years, around 12 years. Diba? Sa ato, pila gani ang total? Butang taha, elementary, din na pila ng preschool or kanang mag-toddler. Sa panadiya. Let's say 6, grade 1 to 6, and then 7 to 12. We have 12 plus 4 sa college. So that is 16. So on the average, maabot sila og 12 years nga gaskwela. Mina ha, so meaning gamay ra kayo sa ila 12, 13. And then their GNI per capita is $66,494 per year na siya. So therefore, that is about 2 million if we convert that one to Philippine peso. So next, Philippines, asa man ta? We are on the 107th. Ay, sorry. So the HDI here is 0.96. 0.957. That is close to 1. And then for gagmay naman actually silang difference. So meaning okay kini sila mga countries. I think Canada, US, na sila sa top 20. If I'm not mistaken. Philippines is on the 107th spot. Our HDI is 0.72. If we round it off to decimal places, 0.72. Atong life expectancy is 71. Okay. And then expected years and the mean years of schooling, tanawag atong mean years. Meaning in reality gid ha, we only have 9 years. 'Di ba? Imagine 6 years ang grade school, ang high school kay for, ay, na naman senior high. 2019. Sige, let's try to, kuha na to ang katong pioneering batches sa senior high. Sibutang ta, 10 years. Meaning, wala gid ka human og high school if we don't count college, di ba? And atong GNI per capita is only 9,000. Pila man na? 9,000. Butang ta, i-45 lang na to, ha? Ay, pila to? 9, 7, 7, 8, 9, 10. O, around 400K. So, around 400K annually on the average. Nagani uban nga magsweldo og 3,000 per month. Di ba? Pila na siya. 3,000 per month in Philippine peso times ang total number of working days naman kay 20. Standard na siya. 20 times, I know, o 20, I mean, 12. Monthly naman di ako gingon. So, let's say 3,000 per month times 12. So, that is basically 36,000 per year. Pero ang minimum wage karon is actually, ano man ata? Pila yung minimum wage karon? 12,000 man siguro. Ay, 10,000. Ay, 8,000 ang minimum wage. But not for ano. So, 8,000 times 12, that is 96. So, almost 100,000 per year. Well, sa ilaan, it's 200 million. Ay, 200 million. 2 million, sorry. 2 million. 500 per day sa NCR. O, 500 per day sa NCR. So, mo man ata na ang highest na ano, na minimum wage sa NCR. Walay biya og kuan, minimum wage ang different cities. So, mo na ang problem there. So, I mean, sa mga regions, sorry, cities and on. So, and then the lowest, usually sa mga African countries, naa sa, diba? Tanawag ilang HDI value, 0.3, 0.39. So, imagine the kind of life that they have. Ilang years of schooling, 2 lang. Diba? GNI per capita per year is only $1,000. Naging 900 o. Nakabawi lang sila sa ilaang schooling. Munang mas taas mas taas o ranking si Central African Republic. Bisag mas gamay ila ang kinakabawi sila sa years of schooling. So, muna siya. Imagine the kind of life that they have. They don't have access to food. Probably galisod pa sila pangita ilang pagkaon, dili makaskwela. Kaya of course, mangita yung pagkaon, nagproblema na. Unsa na lang ang muskwela. So, muna siya. Of course, the kind of life that they have. Dili na siguro na sila gakaon og tarong. Diba? Ningkamot na lang yun. Ang uban, kay rice na lang ginakaon. Ang uban, wala din siguro yung rice. Mo unsa na lang kalang ginakaon, madahon-dahon kung unsa na makitaan sa nature. Anyway, so kana siya. You get the point here? So just to wrap up economic growth and the indicators of growth and development, when we say economic growth, it is the increase in the output, the production of goods and services. So basically, it's represented by the data of GDP and GNI. And then when we say economic development, its indicator is sa indicators sa economic development. When do we know that we are experiencing economic development? Unsa tong tan-awon? 300 sa CDO. Okay. Muna na minimum wage sa CDO, 300. What are we looking at, gani? What's the data that we have to look if we want to know if a country is experiencing economic development? So we have HDI. It's a ratio of 0 to 1, 0 being the lowest and 1 being the highest. So for HDI, we have 3 dimensions that are measured. We have health, education, and standard of living, represented by GNI per capita. Per capita literally means, what does GNI per capita literally means? Okay, per head, per person of that specific country. Klaro ba? Nasabtan? Am I clear, 9H? So, those are the concepts that you have to learn about HDI and when it comes to ranking, economic growth, and development. So now, we go back to the comparative analysis of South Korea and the Philippines. So we have here South Korea in the 1960s. So let's go over. Let's go back to 1960s for both Philippines and South Korea. In 1960s, the GDP per capita of South Korea is $79. For the Philippines, our GDP per capita is $170. So there is really a big difference between our countries. At that time, we were considered as one of the second most progressive economy in Asia. In Asia lang na siya, not all over the world. But South Korea was considered as one of the poorest countries out of the 120 nations na member sa United Nations. Of course, dagan man kaayo countries all over the world. But when it comes to rankings sa United Nations, they are considered one of the poorest countries out of the 120 member nations of the United Nations. And the common denominator between Philippines and South Korea is that we are agriculture-based an agriculture-based economy. But to make things worse for Korea, they just come off from Korean War. So therefore, dili wala gid sila and wala gi ayo ilang resources. Even if agriculture-based sila, dili mapuslan kay gikan lagi sila nagubat, di ba? Many people were starving and dying at that time. So, muna nga, they were really reliant. If you can still remember in the video, they were reliant to economic aids. That was the first step that Park Chung-hee did. Nag-make sure siya nga mag-send siya og mga tao in other countries, especially in Germany, in exchange for income. And the paycheck of these people were sent back to to South Korea, at that time, South Korea, because they want to help in revitalizing and improving para makabakod ang economy sa Korea. And then same goes with in exchange with that, aside from sending the workers to Germany, economic aid followed. Same with the partnership of South Korea with US during the Vietnam War, wherein Park Chung-hee sent 320,000, around more than 320,000 Koreans to help in the Vietnam War. In exchange for that, economic aid from the US and at the same time, improvement sa mga weaponry sa South Korea. So, diba, gabi yun. And then what Park Chung-hee did was to revitalize the economy slowly. So, nag-start siya sa most basic ones, sa agriculture, sa farming, tapos textiles, and then improvement sad sa roads, mga infrastructures, sa harbors, para mas maka-export. And then, after that one, mga telecommunications, railroads, mga dalan, para maka-travel ang mga people at ease. And then, aside from that, instead of focusing in the urban areas, he also revitalized the countryside. So, diba, dili lang sa urban, but also in rural areas. Mo tong na village program, wherein houses or homes of the people were turned into modern houses para ma-improve yun. And then after that one, after the most basic improvements in the economy, then nag-jump siya to different industries. So mo to nag-put up ng mga factories and so on. The improvement din sa steel industry, petrochemicals, sa mga oil refineries, automobiles, electronics, and karon what happened to Korea at present. So, diba? What happened to Korea? They are one of the largest economies all over the world. Grabe kasi massive ilang exportation. And even now, we can feel the presence of Korea in our country, especially in electronics, di ba? Dagan man siguro diri sa inyo, Samsung user, di ba? Kana siya. That's from Korea. What else? Cars like Hyundai. I don't know how to pronounce it properly in Korea. Hyundai siguro? Hyundai? Jungkook. And then, unsa pa man, Kia as well. And then even in terms of entertainment, di ba? Expand na sad sila sa entertainment industry. And I think kita din murag nalamo na gid sa Korea, no? So muna nga Korea ang gigamit because of course you can really feel good how Korea has improved through the years. Actually, not only Korea but also China. Same gyapon og story si yes, skincare, true. 'Di ba? Kanang mga glass skin. Usually and even kanang mga outfit, 'di ba? Kabantay mo ng mga outfit karon nga usually based sa mga outfit sa mga Korean novellas, mga K-dramas. So kung unsay uso karon sa mga babae, dira gyapon nagikan kanang mga boyfriend jeans, and then naka white shoes, then naka t-shirt, dapat magbarong tatanan. 'Di ba? So kana siya, we are really highly influenced in Korea. So, inana ilang gibuhat. So, economic reforms that they did, kani opening sa foreign market. That's why they are export-oriented. What they did is that they are not import-oriented. Nga naman, dili man sila ang type of people nga gasalig sa importation. Why? Because they support local products. Tanaw gyud na ilang mga skincare. 'Di ba sa mga ilang ang mga food, they really try to patronize the products that they have instead of importing them. Yung mga outfit, siguro mga luxury items na siguro man ang ilang mga ginagamit nga from other countries, pero basically they rely good and they support local products. Unlike Philippines, wala ano ang mga gakabiyaan ng mga local kung ano products kay mas ganahan man ta sa mga imported ones, 'di ba? Pero sila no. And then one thing sad that I noticed with Korea is their love for their country. And mo ba tong nahitabo, 'di ba? The time when Park Chung-hee signed an agreement with Japan, it led to the uproar of the citizens tungod kay wa pa sila kalimot sige buhat sa Japan sa ila. Pero kita Philippines, wala past is past. Okay ra kaayo. Tangkilikin. Best friend. Ana lang, di ba? Even if how many years you were under the occupation of the Spaniards, wala murag buhay na hitabo okay ra gyud sa atuwa inana ta ka welcoming, di ba? Open arms pa. Pero for these countries who were what do you call this conquered by other countries, they really kuan it's really embedded in their hearts na huy my god dapat kay magsalig ta sa ato ang kapwa ra nga kuan kalahi dili kay sa lain tao inani lang mindset. That's why they have this the extent of their love for their country is very vast yun. It's unfathomable inana gyud kita kay wala ang ambot lang siguro in general generally speaking I'm not saying na all of us are like that, but usually the successful economies or countries in the world kay ang one of the things that are worth notable kay ilang love for the country. Same with Japan, di ba? Inana magyapon sila, grabe kay sila ka patriotic. Balag muskila sila in other countries pero mubalik gid na sila sa Japan para didto magtrabaho. So asa man ang knowledge will be applied to their country. Same with China. I think there was a time that China took advantage of scholarship offered in the US. Pero what they did is that nibalik ra gyapon sila sa China. Muna nga karon si China, I don't know, are you familiar with ng time bitaw nga rampant kayo ang mga fake na products coming from China? Nakabantay mo ana? That was early 2000. I don't know if or basta known kayo ang China sa mga fake na products. Naka-notice pa mo ana nga time? Nakabantay mo ana? Actually, you know what? That was legal in China. Just so you know. That was the reason why kato ilang grabe nga production, the mass production of different products, especially innovation bitaw. Yes, true kaayo. When you patronize your own products, that would really contribute to the GDP. Nga man, 'di ba? Ikaw kung magpalit ka, kung mag-support kag local products, unsa may effect ana sa business? 'Di ba muda ko ilang earnings, ilang profit? The moment that their earnings or their profit will increase because of an increase of the consumption of the people or the purchase of the people, then that means they can expand their business. That means they can improve more in their factors of production. Thus, mo na maka-hire of people, more people can be hired, more production within the country, tungod na siya sa consumption of the people. So mo nang it's very important good that we support local products. So mo unsa may ripple effect ana niya. So since nag-support man tag local products, then expansion of businesses, of local businesses in our country, more production, at the same time, it could generate jobs for millions of Filipinos. Ina nang nahitabo sa China. Daghan kay sila, dako kay ilang population, but what they did is they took advantage of their large population. What they did is that, since communist man gud ang China, di ba kung communist country kay everything is dictated by the government. So walay makalusot kung dili mo agi sa government. Yes, indeed lang ga. So walay makalusot kung dili mo agi sa government. But what China did is they have a twist of how to go about their economy in terms of the different businesses. So ila para maka-entice sila, they can invite more investors in their country, and at the same time para more sellers ang mainganyo og mag put up og business, they establish different special economic zones. Unsay na ano special economic zones sa China? Ilang buhaton is that those areas, like for example in Shenzhen, di ko pronunciation, basta na siya. That is one of the economic zones, special economic zones in China. And what they do is that they lower taxes there. So muna kung mag-open kag business gamay imong tax dito nga area. That's why it can compel gyud many business owners. At the same time, it entices other businesses or mga foreign direct investments. Those companies who are from other countries can invest there in their country without so much trouble in getting in the country. Okay, diba? Supposedly, since communist man sila, bawal man yun ang ease of access or ease of doing business in that country kay communist man. But because of the special economic zones, free kay sila to enter the economy, to enter China, and they can do whatever they want. They can sell whatever they want. If ilang gusto buhaton kay magbaligya sila mga fake, dili man totally fake. Ang rule lang nila sa mga products nila is that, let's say for example, Nike lugar. Nike lugar nga product, ilang awaton ang itsura sa Nike. Dapat kay na sila innovation. Dapat na improvement para dili siya complete copycat sa Nike. So mo na nga, there was a time dude na daghan kayo mga made in China nga murag same ra bitaw or gikopya ra ang murag bitaw siya class A kanang minana bitaw mga class A nga mga products ani nga mga ay class A nga version ani nga mga products because that was legit in China, and that contributed to more production. At the same time, Chinese people support their local products, and at the same time, it generated a lot of jobs. Muna karon, unsa na may nahitabo? Dagan lagi kayo sila og population, pero they made use of their human capital. So they made use of their human resources. Dagan kay sila workers. Muna nga karon, they are one of the greatest source of labor all over the world. Muna nga tong nagka-pandemic bitaw, 'di ba? Dagan kay sa ila ang production, even Apple. Ang production, ang assembling sa Apple products sa China man. Tanawag ganin yung mga Apple products diha. Kung sige tawag na. Basta ang nakabutang anak kay assembled in China. Kaya naman cheap man ang labor cost dito. Tungod kidagan makisilag workers. No lang ga, walay copyright counterfeit as long as naay gamay nga improvement of the product that they are copying. Mo na siya ang rule of thumb, and that's why hindi na establish mo na ang point sa economic zones nila. You are free to produce whatever you want as long as naay improvement and it's not a complete counterfeit of that certain product. And nun sinitabo. So that was the start of the booming of China. So mo na nga karon sa ila ang production, and then sila pagid ang ga-export pagid one of the largest exporting country all over the world gyapon ang China. So pag abot sa pandemic, unsa man dagan kayo reliant sa China. So pag pandemic nag-close ang China, na halt pud ang production in other countries. Ngano man, nagsalig man sila sa China, very dependent sa China. So ang chain bitaw, ang supply chain nga gikan sa China, dili man nila like for example, automobiles, naay mga parts nga kailangan nila kuhaon sa China, but because nag-close ang economy sa China, dili nila ma-complete ang production sa cars. Tungod kay kailangan nila kuhaon sa China, but nag-close man ang China. So actually most of the countries are very dependent sa China as of present, as of the moment. So that's the thing there. So inana ka-importante ang economic reforms. So what's the point there? So how about Philippines? What can we do about our country? We started off with being so good. Okay man ato ang GDP per capita compared to South Korea, 79 ra ila kita kay more than half biyata sa ila, diba? More than 50% of Korea, more than times 2 ato ang GDP per capita sa ila. But what went wrong? Of course, it started with a lot huge debt gyud. Dako kayo nga utang. I mean, there's nothing wrong with the utang. You know what? When there is a debt, probably you can see a lot of posts na dako na kay utang ang country, di ba? Makita mo siguro mo. But it's not really, or it's not totally a bad thing. We have to borrow money to, of course, to improve our economy because the production alone in our country cannot compensate for all the things that has to be improved in our economy. So dili man gyud totally na may ginatawag nga debt to GDP ratio. So kaya pa nato. And then kung mangutang man gud kay naman gud terms, so let's say for example 20 or 30 years. So hinahinayan lang na siyang bayad. So as long as okay ang debt to GDP ratio, GDP to debt to GDP ratio, pwede pa ta makaborrow. Ang problem lang atong time ni Marcos. Hi. Before the martial law, that was the time when Marcos murag na mga under the table nga mga arrangements from closest niya. So mo nang gabi dito biya nabuo ang mga oligarchy. When you say oligarchy, more ni sila ang specific companies na pwede mag-open. Mo nagi-close atong borders, atong economy, dili pwede makasulod ang other companies. So like for example, the oil industry. Dili sa ato sa Philippines before at that time, we only have 3 oil companies. Namely, ang sama ng 3 major oil companies sa Philippines. Wala mo, ang 3 major oil, Shell, Caltex, and Petron. Mo na sila. Yes, mo na sila ang 3 major oil companies. Nya ato nga time, yun ang ginatawag silang oligarchy because oligopoly man ang system ana, meaning few sellers. And dili kayo open ang competition since tulo raman ang businesses, di ba? Whereas if there is wide range of competition, maunsa man ang prices. Di ba mo baba? Remember, demand and supply. The more the number of sellers, meaning mag-compete na sila sa prices. So kung ang presyo atong kuan dito mamalit tanan, so kailangan mo baba pud gyud ang other sellers or else di sila makabaligya. But at that time, kana oligarchy ang mga companies. And then at the same time, dagang kitag utang. And okay ra unta to kung nangutang ta and napadulong siya sa saktong padulngan. Na naman, although not to discredit but to give credit to that administration, they were able to build infrastructures and infrastructures, oh goodness, infrastructures are very vital good to improve an economy. Importante gid kayo na roads, bridges, mga buildings, ano siya, and any other things that are relevant good, open tourism, kami na bitaw. But the problem at that time is aside from those investments, there were mga ill-gotten wealth that really happened. And that was based good. There is really a data from World Bank about that one na after martial law, our GDP flunked. Like, grabe gid ang pagbaba. Grabe gid. So, moto na ang nahitabo. Dagan makitag utang, di ba ba atong GDP, di ba ba atong GNI, and then since it was martial law, di ba gubot kaayo, and then dagan kinangamatay. So what happened is after that one, the next administration, what they did instead of revitalizing the economy, what they did is paying off the debts. So at the time of Cory Aquino, paying off the debts, si FVR, ang lang kay notable na si Fidel V. Ramos ba na nabuhat. Although ano gyapon more on agriculture man to kay Fidel V. Ramos, pero it was not enough. And then kay Estrada, there was the time na corruption. And then kang Arroyo was actually an economist, and what she did a lot of economic reforms, but rampant kasi ang time ang corruption. Grabe yun. Like, so much. So, mo nga murag nag-add up siya tanan na instead of Philippines improving, wala gid ta ni succeed. So, these are the things that we can do to achieve economic development. Diba? Imagine na for 2 decades, for 20 years, we have to triple the GDP per capita. How do we do that one? Increase more our production, and then make sure that we increase our consumption and support local products. Increase income per capita. The only way to do that one is, kapag akong ilong, my goodness. The only way is to support local products para mas mag-expand ang production and mas maka-employ of more people, generate more jobs for the Filipinos. And then, you have to accelerate physical investments. Kani siya, roads, bridges, airports, although ginabuhat naman siya sa build program. But again, it's very important yun, mga farm to market roads. And then the thing today with the Philippines is that dagan kitag third parties. Not in relationships sa, let's say for farmers, di ba, na yung mga third parties. Mas better unta if ang pagbaligya kay gikan sa farmer, padulong siya sa market. But ang kahitabo na yung mga middlemen. So let's say for example, si Miles here is, na yung mga middlemen. Si Miles here is a negosyante. And then Rupert here is the farmer. Ako ang nasa market. Supposedly, it would be better if ako directly mo palit ka, Rupert. Pero ang kakahitabo, mapugwa si Rupert o baligya sa kang Miles, which is a middleman. So, unsa may mahitabuan na. That's the reason why prices of goods and even mga kanang sa farm bitaw, mga crops, mas mumahal siya because of middlemen. So, yun ang kakahitabo. Anyway, it's 3:37. Goodness gracious. So, kana siya, ease of doing business. This is what happened to China. Di ba? Open kaya siya. Grabe ang competition. And na-apply ang market economy at that sa ana lang sa special economic zones. Fair trade competition. There can only be ease of doing business if there is competition. Muna nga, mahal kaayo. Kabantay mo sa una, mahal kaayo ang bayad sa internet connection. Pero karon daghan naman kayo nanay mga nagsulod mga internet providers and because of that medyo nibaba na kay na may competition. Yeah, sa una gimonopolize man ni PLDT sa una. Same with oil companies. Ana gyud. Muna nga kailangan gyud ma-open ang ease of doing business, ang competition. Competition is very important gyud. Increase in foreign trade, trading, exportation, dapat dili ta mag-rely on importation. We also have to export and invest in human capital, education, training. Dapat kay for those who are educated here, dapat kay the best way is to give back to our country as well. Anyway, it's 3:38. Sorry kaayo for extending, but I hope you learned something. And my last question for you is, can the Filipino win the future? Now you are the key to a successful kita man actually in general. So it's really up to us. Yes, indeed. Inana kakuan ang monopoly. Kung ikaw na own only seller, di ba? Imo yung i-control ang market, makontrol nimo ang prices. So karon dili naman pud ka compensate si PLDT sa kadaghan sa mga tao. Uy, suko kay ko. Anyway, so yes, that is true langga. Anyway, I hope you learned something today and you are the key to the future of our country. We are the key to the future of our country. So it's up to us after all. That's it for today. Sorry for extending. Goodbye, everyone. God bless you.
Bye, sir.
Bye,
Thank
Chair.
you,
Pas kay ko. Sorry kay ha. Pas kay akong yaw-yaw. Pero I hope na mo'y nasabtan sa kong giingon. Bye, everyone.
Filipino LT.
Ako na dong